Attorney General Jeff Sessions is expected to make a decision by tomorrow whether he'll fire Andrew McCabe, the former FBI deputy director, or allow him to retire with a pension. CNN has learned the FBI's Office of Professional Responsibility has recommended he be fired. This follows an internal Justice Department report that claims McCabe misled investigators about his decision to authorize FBI officials to speak to the media about an investigation into the Clinton Foundation. Let's discuss now. CNN political commentator Tara Setmeyer is here. CNN legal commentator Ken Cuccinelli joins us, and political commentator Jen Psaki in the house as well. Good evening to all of you. Jen, I'm going to start with you because sources tell CNN the outgoing FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe at the Justice Department today making a case about why he shouldn't be fired just before his Sunday retirement date, if he makes it that long. So he gets his pension of $60,000 a year. If Sessions fires him before that, McCabe will likely lose out on collecting the pension for about 10 years. The Inspector General's recommendation is to fire McCabe. What do you think Sessions should do, Jen?
What should he do? This is a guy who's been serving in the FBI. He's been a public servant for more than 2 decades. He investigated the Boston bombing. He went and found the people who were responsible for Benghazi. And he's somebody, if you compare with who this administration has been defending, which includes, unfortunately, pedophiles and domestic abusers, this seems pretty harsh. What Sessions, I think, will do is probably fire him because he's also under fire himself and worried about his own job. And that's clearly what Trump and the White House want.
The IG did suggest, though, that he be fired, Jen.
I know, I saw that, but, a lot of what's happening right now in the administration is not entirely on the level. And I think we've seen that time and time again, and there's an uncomfortable line that doesn't typically exist between the Department of Justice and all elements of that and the White House management of it. And I think we should take this all with a grain of salt in terms of the recommendations.
Sarah Sanders, here she is with the White House's position on McCabe.
That's a determination that we would leave up to Attorney General Sessions, but we do think that it is well documented that he has had some very troubling behavior and by most accounts a bad actor and should have some cause for concern, but that would be a determination that DOJ would have to make.
He should not receive his full pension as a result of...
As I just said, that would be a decision that Department of Justice would have to make.
Ken Cuccinelli, the president has publicly called out his attorney general a number of times. If Sessions doesn't do this, will he suffer fallout?
He may get called out again, but the most awkward part of this is that you do have an inspector general who's made this recommendation, and despite the earlier comments about the nature of some behavior in this administration and the public presumption about some of it, the IGs have not really been in on any of that. And you'll recall back in the 70s when the inspector generals were established, every single cabinet secretary came in and testified against establishing IGs, and they've served America very well. So I wouldn't be surprised if McCabe was let go and thus wasn't allowed to start collecting his pension for about a decade or so instead of starting to collect it immediately. But if you asked me to bet on it, I would bet that he isn't fired. I think that despite the president's public comments, I think the attorney general is likely to determine that taking that step is more trouble than it's worth. Yeah. And I think that's what it's going to come down to.
Wow.
That's my guess. But that's how I think it is.
You're not so sure, but were you in the meeting in my office? Because I kind of thought the same thing, Ken, but who knows?
Well, I think if the President of the United States hadn't come out and tweeted against Andrew McCabe the way he has, then I think Sessions could have gotten away with not firing him. But if you turn and watch another channel, Andrew McCabe is one of the main figures that they go after constantly as an example of what's going on at the FBI. Yeah. Well, there is some merit to it, though. Yes, Andrew McCabe has a long history, and he's done a lot of good, but he's also gotten himself caught up in some political decisions, and what he's being accused of and what the fireable offense is something that I think is warranted. I mean, you can't authorize leaks to try to, was about leaks, authorizing leaks to the Wall Street Journal about the investigation into the Clinton Foundation. And it was at a time where it was actually a negative story about the Clintons, and it was to kind of save McCabe's behind because he was part of that investigation, and they let things go, and Hillary Clinton was exonerated for the most part with the email servers and things. And his wife, there was some conflict of interest there with his wife taking money from pro-Clinton folks, Terry McAuliffe in Virginia and their PAC, and he didn't recuse himself from the Clinton investigation, the server investigation, until a week before the election. So you can't mislead investigators about, which is what he did, about his role in those leaks to the Wall Street Journal. That undermines your credibility as an agent, and that's a problem for the agency, especially if we're looking at maintaining the integrity of the FBI.
If Sessions fires McCabe before Sunday, they leave him with, I think, a total of more than $500,000 in early retirement benefits. How do you think that would look?
Well, I think that you could make a case for the fact that, despite the fact that he might have served honorably for a long time, he made considerable mistakes. A civilian, you or I, could not get away with not being truthful to prosecutors. We would end up. Yes, but when you're a public servant, there's a lot of responsibility with the role that you're in, especially when you're at that level in the FBI. But there's a couple of things. Even if he does get fired, and I think that Jeff Sessions is under tremendous pressure to have to do this. I think if he doesn't do it, then Trump is going to fire him. There's no question about that in my mind. So I think that's why he's going to end up getting fired. But McCabe has ways that he can fight this, and he can go through a process. There's a due process where he could try to make his case.
This is how the president responded to the Washington Post report about possible staffing changes he's considering. Watch this.
Well, the story was very false. They wrote a story about staff changes today that was very false. There'll always be change, but very little. It was a very false story. It was very exaggerated and false story. But there'll always be change, and I think you want to see change.
There will always be change, Jen, but very little. Just in the last hour, sources say the president is ready to replace H.R. McMaster. It's not imminent, but when he decides what McMaster decides he's going to do next.
Well, first of all, to say it's exaggerated, having the Secretary of State fired and McMaster, your national security advisor, leaving in the same week or the same month would be probably historic in terms of the chaos it would create and uncertainty about the national security team and who's in charge. So I don't know what he's gauging in terms of exaggerated, but that would be quite significant. There have been all sorts of reports about what McMaster is going to do next, his desire to have a fourth star, his prospects of going to a think tank. So a lot of things are aligning to seem like he's on his way out pretty soon.
Yeah. Why do you want to take us to church, Ken? Why'd you say hallelujah?
Because when you see Tillerson go, and look, I have nothing against Rex Tillerson, but it's very clear that on things like the Iran deal, he differed with the president, and at a certain point, that became too much. Well, McMaster's in the same place, and McMaster's been bringing in a lot of people who do not hold the positions Trump advocated for in foreign policy and national security during the campaign. And there are an awful lot of us in the conservative movement who are not neocons who would love to see him go, think he was a bad choice in the first place, and the fact that he's going near the Secretary of State is quite secondary to removing people who do not have a good foreign policy perspective and program in mind, whether that causes consternation and discussion of turmoil or not. It's still better to remove people who don't share. I
want to ask you another question, Tara, and a quick answer, please, because I'm out of time. We have seen this before, reports of people who are supposedly leaving, the president denies, and then they do leave. He has now lost around half of his senior staff in the first 14 months of his presidency. Why not just own it?
Oh, because he doesn't own anything. He doesn't take responsibility for anything. But I don't understand how someone who bragged about, I hire only the best people, can't seem to keep people. He can't seem to make a decision. He can't surround himself with people. I didn't, but
They're getting so much accomplished that it's just burning.
That's the
so
spin.
Much winning is burning. Really?
Look, it's every day I call it the Chaos Chronicles in the White House. And I'm sorry, there's nothing normal about this. There's nothing normal about we're going to be on our third national security advisor. The Secretary of State is gone. You can't keep a communications director. director. The staff turnover. You're looking at a bunch of cabinet members that are on the rocks that don't deserve to be there. Actually, I mean, this is not normal, and I'm sorry, you can't govern this way with this constant turnover. That's just spin. There's nothing normal about this.
Gotta go. Thank you all. When we come back, a bridge collapsing onto a busy highway in Miami today, killing at least 4 people. We're going to go live to the scene with an update on what went wrong. That's next.